Professor Zix-Nax adjusted his tentacles nervously as he gazed out at the packed auditorium. The annual Galactic Symposium on Xenosociology was always a highlight of the academic calendar, but this year's keynote speaker had the entire audience buzzing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Esteemed colleagues, Zix-Nax began, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. It is my distinct pleasure, and I must admit, slight apprehension, to introduce our keynote speaker for this year's symposium. Professor Alexandra Hawthorne comes to us from the prestigious Terran Institute of Military History on that most fascinating of death worlds, Earth. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Humans were still a relative novelty in galactic academia, their recent inclusion in the Galactic Federation having sparked both curiosity and concern among the more established species. Professor Hawthorne will be presenting on the topic of evolutionary pressures and the development of human warfare. A comprehensive overview. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage. As Zix-Nax retreated to his seat, a tall, athletic human woman strode confidently to the podium. Her red hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her piercing green eyes scanned the audience with an intensity that made several alien professors shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Thank you, Professor Zix-Nax, for that warm introduction," Alexandra began, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "And thank you all for coming. I promise this won't be nearly as dry as the title suggests. In fact, I hope to give you all a taste of the sheer insanity that is human military history." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The auditorium was silent, save for the soft whirring of translation devices and the nervous shuffling of various alien appendages. "Now, I know what you're all thinking," Alexandra continued, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Oh no. The scary Death Worlder is going to tell us horror stories about human violence, and you're absolutely right. But I promise, by the end of this talk, you'll have a newfound appreciation for just how creative humans can be when it comes to finding new and exciting ways to murder each other." Professor Glorp, a gelatinous mass of sentient ooze seated in the front row, rippled with a mixture of fascination and dread. His closest neighbor, a feathered being named Kriak, leaned over and whispered, "Is it too late to lead?" Alexandra, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the discomfort in the room, pressed on. "Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Picture, if you will, a group of early humans. They're standing on the African savannah, surrounded by predators that would very much like to have them for dinner. What do these clever little apes do? They pick up a stick, sharpen it, and suddenly they're not prey anymore." The holographic display behind her flickered to life, showing a crude animation of a human fending off a saber-toothed cat with a spear. Several audience members flinched at the violent imagery. "But here's the kicker," Alexandra continued, her voice rising with excitement. "These humans look at this pointy stick and think, hey, you know what would be great? If we could throw this stick really far and stab things from a distance, and just like that, the Atlatl is born." The hologram shifted to show a human using a strange, hooked device to launch a spear with incredible force. Professor Zix-Nax's tentacles curled in on themselves, a clear sign of distress among his species. "Now I know what you're thinking," Alexandra said, her tone conversational. "Surely, Professor Hawthorne, humans must have eventually grown tired of stabbing things, even from a distance, and to that, I say, oh my sweet summer children, we were just getting started." The next hour was a whirlwind tour through the bloody annals of human history. Alexandra regaled the increasingly horrified audience with tales of Roman legions and their efficient killing machines, Mongolian horse archers who could shoot with deadly accuracy while galloping at full speed, and the development of gunpowder weapons that changed the face of warfare forever. "But wait," Alexandra exclaimed, her eyes shining with an almost manic glee. "We haven't even gotten to the really good stuff yet. Let me tell you about the time humans decided that regular bombs just weren't cutting it anymore. So we split the atom and harnessed the power of the sun itself to make things go boom." The hologram displayed a massive mushroom cloud rising ominously into the sky. Professor Glorp, who had been slowly melting throughout the presentation, finally lost cohesion and slipped off his chair with a wet splat. "Oops," Alexandra said, glancing at the puddle of goo that was once Professor Glorp. "Perhaps we should take a short break." "Don't worry, folks. I'm told he does that sometimes. He'll pull himself together soon enough." As the lights came up and the shell-shocked audience filed out for refreshments, Alexandra couldn't help but chuckle to herself. She'd barely scratched the surface of human ingenuity when it came to warfare, and she couldn't wait to see their reactions to the second half of her presentation. During the break, a small group of professors huddled together in the corner of the reception area, casting nervous glances at Alexandra as she chatted amiably with the symposium organizers. "I can't believe they invited a Death Worlder to give the keynote," whispered Professor Sirlith, a plant-based lifeform whose leaves were trembling slightly. Did you see the way her eyes lit up when she talked about those nuclear weapons? Terrifying. Kriak ruffled his feathers in agitation. I've studied Terran history, but I've never heard it presented quite like that. It's as if she's proud of her species' violent past. Perhaps interjected a new voice, causing the group to jump in surprise. They turned to find a tall, lanky human male standing behind them, a bemused expression on his face. Or perhaps she's simply acknowledging that our history, violent as it may be, has shaped us into the species we are today. The alien professors exchanged uncomfortable glances before Silith managed to stammer out, "And you are?" "Dr. Marcus Chen," the human replied with a slight bow. "I'm Professor Hawthorne's colleague from the Terran Institute. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, and I thought I might offer a different perspective." Before any of the aliens could respond, a chime sounded, signaling the end of the break. As they filed back into the auditorium, Dr. Chen fell into step beside them. "I suggest you pay close attention to the second half of Alexandra's presentation," he said with a wink. "You might be surprised by what you learn." As the audience settled back into their seats with Professor Glorb, having mostly reconstituted himself, albeit with a slightly lopsided shape, Alexandra returned to the podium, her energy seemingly undiminished. "Welcome back, everyone. I hope you've all had a chance to recover from the first half of our journey through human military history. Now, who's ready to dive into the really weird stuff?" A collective groan rippled through the audience, but Alexandra pressed on, undeterred. "Let's talk about some of the more creative approaches humans have taken to warfare over the years. For instance, did you know that during World War II, the United States seriously considered using bats as bombers?" The hologram displayed a rather comical image of a bat wearing a tiny helmet and carrying a miniature bomb. Despite their trepidation, several audience members couldn't suppress a chuckle. "I'm not joking," Alexandra continued, grinning. "Project X-Ray involves strapping tiny incendiary devices to bats and releasing them over Japanese cities. The idea was that the bats would roost in buildings, and when the timers on the devices went off, instant firestorm. The project was eventually scrapped, but not before they accidentally set fire to their own testing facility." Professor Zixnax's tentacles uncurled slightly, a sign of cautious interest. "Fascinating," he muttered. "Utterly insane, but fascinating." Alexandra's grin widened. "Oh, but that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to human military madness. Let me tell you about the time we tried to use weather as a weapon. Operation Popeye, during the Vietnam War, involved seeding clouds to extend the monsoon season and bog down enemy supply lines. We literally tried to weaponize rain." The hologram shifted to show aircraft releasing chemicals into clouds, followed by images of muddy, impassable roads. The audience was now leaning forward, their earlier horror giving way to a mix of disbelief and morbid curiosity. "But why stop at rain?" Alexandra continued, her voice taking on a tone of mock innocence. No, we humans are nothing if not ambitious. So naturally we thought, hey, you know what would be great? If we could control earthquakes, enter Project SEAL, a joint US-New Zealand operation that attempted to create a tsunami bomb, because apparently regular bombs just weren't wet enough. Professor Kriak's feathers stood on end. "Surely you jest, Professor Hawthorne. No species would be foolish enough to attempt to weaponize tectonic activity." Alexandra's laugh was equal parts amused and rueful. "Oh, my dear Professor Kriak, you severely underestimate human foolishness. We once nuked our own magnetosphere just to see what would happen. Look up Operation Fishbowl when you have a chance. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for anyone's satellites." As Alexandra continued her tour through the stranger corners of human military history, the audience's reactions began to shift. The initial horror and disbelief gave way to a grudging fascination. Even Professor Glorp, who had been maintaining a safe distance from the edge of his seat, began to lean forward, his gelatinous form quivering with interest. "Now," Alexandra said, her tone becoming more serious, "I know I've painted a rather grim picture of humanity's obsession with finding new and exciting ways to kill each other. But there's another side to this story, one that I think is crucial to understanding our species." The hologram behind her shifted once more, this time showing images of human medical advances, space exploration, and scenes of international cooperation. "You see," she continued, her voice softer now, "the same drive that led us to split the atom for destruction also pushed us to harness it for energy. The rockets we developed to deliver warheads took us to the moon and beyond. And many of the medical advances we've made, which we've gladly shared with the galactic community, have their roots in treating the wounds of war." She paused, letting her words sink in. The auditorium was silent, the earlier nervous energy replaced by rapt attention. Humans are, by nature, problem solvers. We see a challenge, and we tackle it head-on, often with a creativity that borders on madness. Yes, we've applied that creativity to warfare in ways that might seem horrifying to other species, but we've also applied it to medicine, to science, to exploration, and to diplomacy. Alexandra's eyes scanned the audience, meeting the gazes or equivalent sensory organs of various alien professors, the same tenacity that helped us survive on a death world, that drove us to develop increasingly sophisticated ways of fighting each other, is now driving us to reach for the stars, to cure diseases, and yes, to find our place in this vast galactic community. She smiled, a gentle expression that stood in stark contrast to the often violent imagery of her presentation. We humans have a saying, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Our history is bloody, yes, but it's also a story of progress, of learning from our mistakes, of striving to be better. As Alexandra's presentation drew to a close, the auditorium erupted in a cacophony of alien vocalizations that approximated applause. Even Professor Glorp, who had spent most of the lecture in various states of liquefaction, had pulled himself together enough to vibrate appreciatively. Professor Zixnax made his way back to the podium, his tentacles now waving with excitement rather than nervousness. Thank you, Professor Hawthorne, for that illuminating presentation. I believe I speak for all of us when I say that we will never look at human history quite the same way again. As the audience began to file out, chattering excitedly among themselves, Dr. Chen approached Alexandra with a grin. Well done. Alex, I think you've managed to terrify and inspire them in equal measure. Alexandra chuckled, running a hand through her hair. That was the goal. It's important for them to understand our history, both the good and the bad. We can't change where we've come from, but we can certainly influence where we're going. Speaking of where we're going, Dr. Chen said, glancing at his watch, we've got that meeting with the Galactic Council in an hour. Something about discussing human integration into peacekeeping forces. Alexandra's eyes twinkled with mischief. Oh, this should be fun. Wait until they hear about our plan to weaponize kindness and deploy tactical hugs. As they made their way out of the auditorium, Alexandra couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism. Yes, humanity's history was filled with violence and conflict, but it was also a testament to their resilience, creativity, and capacity for growth. And now, as they took their place among the stars, she was excited to see what new challenges they would tackle, what problems they would solve, and what wonders they would create. After all, if humans could turn the concept of mutually assured destruction into a peacekeeping strategy, who knew what they might accomplish as part of a galactic civilization? The universe, Alexandra mused, had better brace itself. Humanity was just getting started. In the days and weeks following Professor Hawthorne's presentation, the academic community buzzed with discussion and debate. Xenoanthropologists pored over human historical records. Military strategists from various species studied Earth's martial arts with newfound respect and more than a little trepidation. And diplomatic corps across the galaxy scrambled to update their protocols for dealing with these fascinatingly unpredictable Death-Worlders. Professor Glorp, having finally mastered the art of maintaining his shape throughout an entire lecture, began a popular seminar series titled Human History. Separating fact from what the actual Quiznark, his first-hand account of Alexandra's presentation, complete with dramatic reenactments of his various states of liquefaction, became something of a legend among the student body. Meanwhile, Professor Zixnax found himself inundated with requests for research partnerships from human institutions. His paper, Death-World Darwinism, How Evolutionary Pressures Shaped Human Military Innovation, became required reading in xenobiology departments across the galaxy. But perhaps the most significant outcome of Alexandra's lecture came 6 months later, when the Galactic Council convened to discuss the formation of a new rapid response peacekeeping force. To the surprise of many, the Council voted unanimously to put humans in charge of tactical planning and training. When asked about this unexpected decision, Council President Sorbak simply shrugged his upper appendages and said, "Have you seen what these creatures can do with a pointy stick and a bad attitude? Imagine what they could accomplish if we point them at our problems and say, fix this." And so, as humanity continued to find its place among the stars, the galaxy watched with a mixture of fascination, fear, and growing respect. After all, any species crazy enough to weaponize bats was probably capable of just about anything. The universe, it seemed, was in for quite a ride. As the newly formed Galactic Rapid Response and Peacekeeping Force Group took shape under human leadership, the universe watched with bated breath. Many species were eager to see how the Death-Worlders would apply their martial creativity to maintaining galactic peace. Others were simply relieved that humanity's penchant for violence might finally be directed at something other than itself. 6 months after its formation, the group faced its first major crisis. A long, simmering territorial dispute between the methane-breathing Zoltans and the silicon-based crystallines had erupted into open conflict in the Omega Nebula, as reports of skirmishes and rising tensions flooded in. The Galactic Council turned to the humans for a solution. Colonel Sarah Chen, daughter of Dr. Marcus Chen and protege of Professor Alexandra Hawthorne, found herself at the helm of this precarious situation. As she stood before the holographic display in the Group Command Center, surrounded by a diverse array of alien officers, she couldn't help but grin. "All right, folks," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the same infectious enthusiasm as her mentors. "Time to show the galaxy what humans can do when we put our minds to stopping a war instead of starting one." Lieutenant Zixara, a Silosian with shimmering, color-changing skin, raised a tentative appendage. "Begging your pardon, Colonel, but the Zoltans and crystallines have been at odds for centuries. How do you propose to resolve this conflict without resorting to force?" Sarah's grin widened. "Oh, we're absolutely going to use force, Lieutenant, just not in the way anyone expects." Over the next few hours, Sarah outlined a plan so audacious, so utterly human, that her alien colleagues could only stare in a mixture of awe and horror. "You want to do what," sputtered Commander Gloop, a gelatinous being who bore a striking resemblance to the now famous Professor Gloff Daub. "You heard me," Sarah replied, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "We're going to throw them a party, the biggest, loudest, most outrageous party this galaxy has ever seen." As Sarah explained her plan, the alien officers exchanged bewildered glances. The humans intended to set up a massive celebration in the neutral zone between the warring factions, complete with music, games, and copious amounts of food and drink suitable for both methane and silicon-based life forms. "But how will this stop the fighting?" asked Captain K. Rix, a feathered being whose plumage was ruffling in confusion. "Simple," Sarah replied. "We're going to make it impossible for them to fight without looking like total party poopers. We'll invite dignitaries from every species in the galaxy, set up live feeds to every inhabited world, and market it as the Galactic Festival of Unity and Peace. Any violence will be seen as a direct insult to the entire galactic community." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Plus, have you ever tried to aim a plasma cannon while dancing to Earth's greatest hit, the Macarena? Trust me, it's harder than it looks." Despite their reservations, the alien officers had to admit that the plan was so crazy it just might work. And work it did, in spectacular fashion. The Galactic Festival of Unity and Peace quickly became the most talked-about event in recent galactic history. As the Zoltans and crystallines arrived at the edges of the neutral zone, weapons at the ready, they were met not with enemy fire, but with the booming sounds of Earth's most infectious dance music, and the sight of thousands of aliens from across the galaxy getting down in zero-G dance pods. Faced with the choice of either joining the party or being forever known as the species that ruined the greatest galactic bash ever thrown, both the Zoltans and crystallines reluctantly laid down their arms and picked up glow sticks instead. By the end of the week-long celebration, trade agreements had been signed on dance floors, peace treaties had been negotiated over interspecies drinking games, and more than a few cross-species romances had blossomed in the festival's tunnel of intergalactic love. As the last revelers departed and the cleaning drones moved in to tackle the monumental mess, Sarah stood beside her father and Professor Hawthorne, watching the Zoltan and crystalline leaders exchange ceremonial gifts and hangover cures. "You know," Dr. Chen mused, "when I suggested that humans could weaponize kindness, I didn't quite envision this." Alexandra chuckled. "Oh, I don't know. Using our talent for excess and our love of a good party to overwhelm conflict with sheer fun seems pretty on brand for humanity to me." Sarah nodded, a satisfied smile on her face. "We've spent millennia finding creative ways to wage war. It's about time we got equally creative with waging peace." As news of the GRRPF's unconventional success spread across the galaxy, perceptions of humanity began to shift. Yes, they were still seen as the crazy Deathworlders with a knack for violence, but now they were also known as the species that could turn a potential war into the party of the century. In the following months, the GRRPF's aggressive peacekeeping techniques continued to yield surprising results. They resolved a hostage situation by challenging the captors to a galaxy-wide esports tournament with the hostages as their teammates, ended a trade dispute with an interstellar bake-off, and prevented a religious war by introducing both sides to the human concept of stand-up comedy. It turned out that laughing together was a great way to forget about killing each other. Back at the Galactic University of Xenostides, Professor Zax Nax found himself revising his curriculum yet again. His popular course, once titled Human History, a study in creative violence, was now called Human Ingenuity. from weapons of war to tools of peace. Meanwhile, Professor Glorp had become something of a celebrity. His first-hand accounts of human peacekeeping methods had made him a sought-after guest on talk shows across the galaxy. He'd even started a successful workout program called Get Fit the Human Way, which mostly involved running away from imaginary predators and lifting heavy objects for no apparent reason. As for Alexandra Hawthorne, she found herself busier than ever. The Terran Institute of Military History had expanded its focus, becoming the Terran Institute of Conflict Resolution and Interspecies Cooperation. Alexandra now split her time between giving lectures on human history and advising the GRUP on how to adapt Earth's most bizarre traditions into peacekeeping strategies. One evening, as she was preparing for a presentation on the diplomatic applications of Earth's competitive eating contest, Alexandra received an unexpected visitor. Council President Sorbax shawed into her office, all six of his eyes blinking nervously. "Professor Hawthorne," he began, his universal translator struggling to convey his mix of emotions. "I must admit, when we first invited humans to join the galactic community, I had concerns." Alexandra raised an eyebrow but said nothing, allowing the council president to continue. "Your history, your biology, your very planet. Everything about your species seemed to scream danger," Sorbax continued. "But now, seeing how you've applied that same intensity to maintaining peace, I find myself both terrified and deeply, deeply grateful." Alexandra smiled, rising from her desk to shake one of Zexa's many hands. "Thank you, Mr. President. We humans have a saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. We've spent too long being the source of conflict in our own history. Now that we've joined the galactic community, we're determined to be a force for good." As Rex Sorbax left her office, visibly relieved and muttering something about humans being terrifyingly wholesome, Alexandra turned back to her presentation. She had to finish preparing for tomorrow's demonstration on how a pie-eating contest could resolve a 3-century-old blood feud. Staring out her window at the glittering expanse of stars, Alexandra couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Humanity had come a long way from sharpened sticks and battle cries. They'd taken their capacity for violence, their drive to overcome challenges, and their often ridiculous creativity, and turned them into forces for unity and peace. Sure, they still scared the photosynthesis out of most other species, and yes, their methods were often so unorthodox that they bordered on lunacy. But as Alexandra liked to remind her students, in a galaxy full of different biologies, cultures, and ways of thinking, sometimes it took a little human craziness to make things work. As she put the finishing touches on her presentation, Alexandra couldn't help but chuckle. Who would have thought that humanity's most significant contribution to galactic peace would be teaching everyone how to party like there's no tomorrow? Then again, coming from a species that had seriously considered weaponizing bats, perhaps it wasn't so surprising after all. The universe, it seemed, had better buckle up, because if there was one thing humans loved more than a good fight, it was a good time, and they were determined to make sure the entire galaxy joined in the fun. As humanity's reputation for unorthodox peacekeeping spread across the galaxy, it was perhaps inevitable that some would seek to test the limits of this new approach. The opportunity arose sooner than anyone expected, in the form of the notoriously warlike Zorgans. The Zorgans, a species of silicon-based life forms resembling sentient geodes, had long been the bane of galactic diplomacy. Their entire culture revolved around combat, with social status determined by the number of battles won and enemies crushed. When they announced their intention to expand their territory into the densely populated Cygnus Arm, the Galactic Council knew they had a potential catastrophe on their hands. Enter Operation Rockslide, the GRRPF's most ambitious project yet. Colonel Sarashen stood before the Galactic Council, her expression a mix of excitement and what some species might mistake for madness. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted beings of all configurations," she began, "I give you the solution to our Zorgan problem, the first annual Galactic Olympics." The council chamber erupted in a cacophony of confused alien vocalizations. President Sorbax, who by now was somewhat accustomed to human insanity, simply sighed and gestured for Sarah to continue. "Think about it," Sarah explained, her eyes gleaming. "The Zorgans value combat and competition above all else. So, we give them competition on a scale they've never imagined. We invite every species in the galaxy to participate in a grand tournament of skill, strength, and strategy. The Zorgans can pit themselves against the greatest warriors the galaxy has to offer, without anyone actually getting killed." As Sarah outlined the plan, even the most skeptical council members found themselves nodding along. The proposed Galactic Olympics would feature everything from traditional human sports, suitably modified for various alien physiologies, to esoteric alien contests of skill. The grand prize: a significant chunk of uninhabited space in the Cygnus Arm, to be awarded to the species that accumulated the most points across all events. And the best part, Sarah concluded with a grin, is that we'll be broadcasting the whole thing live across the galaxy. The Zorgans won't be able to resist the chance to prove their superiority in front of such a massive audience. As the council deliberated, Professor Alexandra Hawthorne and Dr. Marcus Chen watched from the observation gallery. You know, Marcus mused, when I was studying human history, I never imagined a penchant for turning everything into a sport would end up saving the galaxy. Alexandra chuckled. Oh, I don't know. Remember the ancient Olympics? They were originally a way to give Greek city-states a non-lethal outlet for their rivalries. We're just scaling it up a bit. A bit, Marcus raised an eyebrow. We're talking about potentially preventing an interstellar war here. Details, Alexandra waved dismissively. The important thing is, we're about to introduce the galaxy to the joy of sports rivalries, overpriced concessions, and questionable referee decisions. If that doesn't unite everyone against a common enemy, I don't know what will. As it turned out, the first annual Galactic Olympics was even more successful and chaotic than anyone could have anticipated. The opening ceremony, held on a massive space station hastily constructed in neutral territory, set the tone for the events to follow. The human tradition of an Olympic torch was adapted into a ceremonial ignition of a miniature star, with each participating species adding a unique form of fuel to create a spectacle of color and energy visible from several light years away. The events themselves were a testament to the diversity of galactic life. Traditional human sports like swimming had to be adapted into three-dimensional underwater obstacle courses to accommodate species that lived in liquid methane. The shot put became a favorite among high-gravity species, while low-gravity beings excelled in a new sport that could only be described as zero-G rhythmic gymnastics meets interpretive dance. The Zorgans, true to form, threw themselves into the competition with gusto. Their natural crystalline armor made them formidable opponents in many of the physical contests, but they struggled hilariously in events requiring flexibility or fine motor control. The sight of a Zorgan attempting to perform a gymnastics floor routine quickly became one of the most watched videos in galactic history. But it was the unexpected side effects of the Olympics that truly transformed galactic society. Species that had never interacted before found themselves cheering side by side in the stands. Interspecies sports teams formed, leading to bizarre but effective combinations like the methane-breathing Zoltans partnering with silicon-based crystallines for synchronized swimming routines that defied the laws of physics. Even the galactic food court, hastily assembled to cater to the myriad dietary needs of spectators, became a hotbed of culinary diplomacy. It turned out that sharing a meal of deep-fried Jovian storm crystals was a great way to bridge cultural divides. As the games progressed, something remarkable happened. The Zorgans, who had entered the Olympics with the intention of proving their superiority, found themselves genuinely enjoying the competition for its own sake. They marveled at the strength of species they had once dismissed as weak, admired the agility of beings they had considered beneath notice, and even developed a grudging respect for the strategic minds of their non-silicon competitors. By the time the closing ceremony rolled around, with its spectacular display of synchronized starship maneuvers set to a galaxy-wide sing-along of "We Are the Champions," the Zorgans had undergone a cultural shift. They still valued combat and competition, but now they saw the rest of the galaxy not as potential conquest, but as worthy opponents to test themselves against. In the end, it wasn't the Zorgans who won the grand prize of territory in the Cygnus Arm. That honor went to a coalition team of various species who had banded together to compete in events that played to each of their strengths. The Zorgans, to everyone's surprise, graciously congratulated the winners and immediately began strategizing for the next Olympics. As the games concluded and the participants began to disperse, Colonel Sarah Shen found herself in a quiet moment with Professor Hawthorne and Dr. Chen. "Well," Sarah said, leaning back in her chair with a satisfied sigh, "I'd say that was a success." Alexandra nodded, a proud smile on her face. "Indeed. We managed to prevent a war, foster interspecies cooperation, and introduce the galaxy to the dubious joy of sports fandoms. Not bad for a species that once thought using cats as bomb delivery systems was a good idea." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head in amazement. "You know, when I first started studying human history, I always wondered how a species with our violent past could ever find a place in a peaceful galactic community. I never imagined the answer would be by being so utterly, chaotically human that we confuse everyone into getting along. As they watched the swirl of aliens excitedly discussing the games and making plans for the next Olympics, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Humanity had taken its capacity for violence, its drive for competition, and its often bizarre creativity, and turned them into forces for unity and peace on a galactic scale. So Sarah said, a mischievous glint in her eye, "What do you think we should do for an encore?" "I was thinking maybe we could introduce the galaxy to the concept of reality TV. Nothing brings people together like collectively hating on ridiculous drama, right?" Alexandra and Marcus exchanged a look of mock horror before bursting into laughter. As their laughter echoed through the station, joined by the varied sounds of alien mirth from all around, one thing became clear. The galaxy might never be the same again, but with humanity's unique brand of chaos on their side, it was certainly going to be a lot more interesting. And somewhere in the depths of space, a Zorgon craft was making its way home, its crew excitedly discussing plans for building the galaxy's first zero-G volleyball court. The universe, it seemed, had better brace itself. The human era of galactic peace through glorious, chaotic competition had only just begun. As the dust settled from the first annual Galactic Olympics, the ripple effects of humanity's latest peacekeeping endeavor continued to spread across the cosmos. The GRUP found itself busier than ever, not with preventing wars, but with managing the explosion of interspecies cultural exchanges that followed the games. Colonel Sarah Chen, now promoted to general, sat in her office aboard the GRUP flagship Pax Humana scrolling through the latest reports with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered, before catching herself and chuckling at the irony of using the very phrase she'd been warned against. A holographic image of Professor Alexandra Hawthorne flickered to life on her desk. "What's got you laughing this time, Sarah?" the professor asked, her eyes twinkling with familiar mischief. Sarah shook her head, grinning. "You won't believe this, but the Zorgons have just submitted a proposal for the next Galactic Olympics. They want to include something called extreme xenobotany." Alexandra raised an eyebrow. "Do I even want to know?" Apparently, Sarah explained, barely containing her laughter, it involves participants from different species trying to cultivate plants from other worlds. The Zorgons are particularly excited about growing earth cacti. They see it as the ultimate challenge, nurturing life that's the complete opposite of their crystalline forms. Alexandra burst into laughter. "Well, I suppose it's better than their previous hobby of conquering planets, though I pity the poor Zorgon who gets a face full of cactus spines." As they continued to chat, discussing the latest developments in galactic diplomacy, neither of them could have imagined the scene unfolding light years away on the Zorgon homeworld. In a climate-controlled dome, a group of Zorgon scientists huddled around a small green plant. Their crystalline bodies reflected the artificial sunlight as they meticulously adjusted the soil composition and humidity levels. Careful, the lead scientist Zorkax cautioned as his assistant reached out to touch the tiny cactus. "Remember, it's a death world plant. It could be dangerous." The assistant pulled back quickly, casting a nervous glance at the innocuous-looking earth plant. "It's hard to believe," he mused, "that the same species that created this prickly little lifeform also came up with the idea of the Galactic Olympics." Zorkax nodded sagely, his crystalline structure shimmering with pride. "Indeed. The humans are full of surprises. Who would have thought that we, the mighty Zorgons, would one day find glory not in conquest, but in nurturing life from across the stars?" Back on the Pax Humana, Sarah was wrapping up her call with Alexandra when an urgent message came through. She quickly scanned it, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Well, this is unexpected," she said, looking up at Alexandra's hologram. "Remember that reality TV idea we joked about? Apparently some entrepreneurial humans have gone ahead and done it. They're calling it Keeping Up with the Carbonians." Alexandra's jaw dropped. "The Carbonians, aren't they the species that communicates entirely through interpretive dance and color changes?" Sarah nodded, a grin spreading across her face. "Yep, the show's tagline is 'Watch the drama unfold in ways you literally can't comprehend.' It's become an overnight sensation. Apparently, half the galaxy is tuning in, not because they understand what's happening, but because it's so bewildering that they can't look away." As they shared a laugh over this latest development, a thought struck Sarah. "You know," she said, her tone becoming more reflective, "when you gave that lecture on human military history all those years ago, did you ever imagine it would lead to, well, all this?" Alexandra smiled, a mix of pride and wonder in her eyes. "Honestly, Not in a million years. I thought I was just giving a bunch of alien professors nightmares about humanity's violent past. I never dreamed we'd end up preventing wars with sports competitions and reality TV. Sarah leaned back in her chair, gazing out at the stars visible through her office viewport. It's funny, isn't it? We spent so much of our history finding new and creative ways to fight each other. Now we're using that same creativity to bring the galaxy together. Indeed, Alexandra agreed. Though I have to wonder, what's next? How else can we surprise the galaxy? As if on cue, another message pinged on Sarah's console. She read it quickly, then burst into laughter. "Oh, you're going to love this," she said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "The Flafions, you remember? The ones with the complex mating dances. They've just announced they're hosting an intergalactic dance competition. They're calling it So You Think You Can Transcend the Physical Limitations of Your Species and Express the Fundamental Truths of the Universe Through Rhythmic Movement." Alexandra blinked. "That's quite a title." "Oh, it gets better," Sarah continued, barely able to contain her glee. "They've asked humanity to be the judges because, and I quote, 'No other species has such a baffling variety of dance styles, from the sublime to the ridiculous.'" As the two women dissolved into laughter, the scene pulled back, revealing the vast expanse of the galaxy beyond the ship's viewport. Across countless worlds, species that had once eyed each other with suspicion or outright hostility were now coming together in ways no one could have predicted. Zorgans tenderly cultivated plants from worlds they once sought to conquer. Carbonians became unlikely media stars, their incomprehensible dramas uniting viewers across the cosmos. And on a small, blue planet that had once been considered a deadly backwater, humans looked up at the stars with pride, knowing that their unique blend of creativity, competitiveness, and sheer audacity had transformed the galaxy. In the halls of the Galactic University of Cianostides, Professor Zixnax put the finishing touches on his latest curriculum update. The course, once focused on the terrifying military history of humanity, now bore a new title, Human Ingenuity, From Weapons of War to Wonders of Peace. And in a bustling spaceport on the edge of known space, a young Silosian stood before a recruitment poster for the Galactic Rapid Response and Peacekeeping Force. The post showed beings of all species working together, with a simple tagline that captured the spirit of this new era. "Join the GRUPF, because sometimes peace is the craziest adventure of all." As the Silosians signed up, eager to be part of this grand, chaotic experiment in galactic harmony, one thing was clear: the universe would never be the same again. But with humanity's unique brand of insanity leading the way, it was certainly going to be one hell of a ride. In the end, it turned out that the greatest weapon in humanity's arsenal wasn't their capacity for violence or their technological prowess. It was their boundless creativity, their ability to find joy in the absurd, and their knack for turning any situation, even peace, into a spectacle that no one could resist joining. And so, as the galaxy spun on, filled with the sounds of laughter, the clash of friendly competition, and the occasional befuddled alien trying to make sense of the latest human-inspired craze, one thing was certain: the Deathwalders had not just found their place among the stars, they had reshaped the very fabric of galactic society, one outrageous idea at a time. The history books might have started with tales of war and violence, but they would continue with stories of unity, laughter, and the kind of peace that only a species crazy enough to weaponize kindness could create. And somewhere, in the great cosmic dance of it all, the spirit of that first lecturer, Professor Alexandra Hawthorne, lived on, a testament to the power of sharing stories, even the scary ones, and the incredible places they could lead. The end, or perhaps just the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure yet.